toddies around about the same time when he came on with Dave Broom. And using that as a hot cocktail, and again using the lemon and the sugar in that period of time. Whereas we view a hot toddy as a cheaper drink now. It was the one that showed you you could afford the sugar.
But the Blue Blazer, invented by Jerry Thomas, he made that, I think, for the president of America at the time, and swore to only make it for presidents or vice presidents from there on. And that's just sugar and whiskey and water set alight.
That's crazy.
So like it's mental, isn't it?
So with that then, in your opinion, what actually makes a good cocktail bar? Is it the person making the cocktails and the fact that they're prepared to go, off track with how they make things, or is it the ingredients themselves, or is it a combination of it all?
So I think so. It's kind of So what makes a good cocktail bar is going to be the people and to an extent the drinks, but it's a much bigger thing. What makes a good cocktail is definitely going to be the skill of the bartender and the quality of the products that go in. Would I rather be in a shit bar with a great drink? No. I'd rather be in a great bar with a shit drink.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one thing, and I know I've spoke about this before, and I think it has come up on the Whiskey Circus, that when people go in and, like you've said with Milroy's and that, you seat the people, they're obviously seated away from the bar and things like that. Yeah. It is part of the experience, though, watching how your cocktail is made, or is it all about drinking it?
I think it's difficult for me to answer that because I'm not a guest. I'm not a consumer.
Yeah.
I've peeked behind the curtain and it's soggy and it's long hours and it's rubbish.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of guests, I think they love seeing it. And I think Milroy's works really well for that. The Vault works really well for that because we do seat people at the bar. And the way that I've set up the stations is rather than being two independent stations, the whole bar is basically one giant station with four hands working it, with an expediter on the par. So it almost looks like short order cooks, shouting at each other, and you can see the energy just kind of roll off the bar into the room, and all the people sat on the bar. And when everyone's in sync like that, it makes for an amazing experience.
But also from experience, Chris, what you guys have at your cocktail bars is great staff serving the drinks that are happy to sit there and explain how they're made and give you sometimes 5-10 minutes at the table to go through your cocktail, which is what you don't always get at the bar.
Well, that's it. And also I think for people who are sat at a table and aren't able to be sat at the bar and experience the bartender making the drinks, sometimes that 5 minutes from whoever's on the floor it's going to be the equivalent.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the interesting thing then. Do you ever get people coming in and saying that they want a particular person to make the cocktail then, or is it like when you go to say the hairdressers or a restaurant and it's like, no, I'd like so and so to make it? Or
I think so. I think guests or regulars will always have their favorite bartender. If it begins to define your bar, then you failed at something.
Right.
Because consistency is king. Inconsistency is what kills a hospitality business.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't get the same drink every day, no matter who's working, then there's something wrong with the bar you're in.
Yeah. So obviously the difference then between, say, a cocktail bar and a general bar is where you might go in and sit down at the bar and chat to the person behind the bar. In theory, a cocktail, is it a case of a good cocktail barman or bar lady will be insignificant? It's about the drink. It's not necessarily about sitting down and talking to you. Obviously, you're going to explain what you're doing, and I get that, but
I believe there shouldn't be a distinction between a good cocktail bar or a good bar, right?
Yeah.
I think what makes a cocktail bar is the breadth of ingredients.
Yeah.
Right. They just have access to more, so they can make more mixed drinks. But I think the more distinction we put sort of between cocktail bars and bars is kind of, or like a pub, I think it perpetuates this idea that at one joint you can just employ a student and they don't have to know anything and they can be rubbish at their job, and then sort of separates the others as artisans. I think that's counterintuitive to the success of the hospitality industry in the UK as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should just be really proud of what we do, and you should be able to walk into a pub and be able to get a Negroni. And to be fair, in London, you can in most pubs. That's a great first step.
Yeah.
We don't have the products to make the rest of the drinks. That should really be the only distinction.
And so one thing you mentioned in that was ingredients and the importance of ingredients. Now, to somebody who doesn't really know much about cocktails and doesn't go into the cocktail bar scene and things like that, how much preparation goes into? Is it like being a chef and where it's all about the preparation of things?
It can be, yeah. I mean, I've stayed at a bar overnight because I was making something for the next day. And it just took all evening. I started it before shift, worked my service, and had to finish my prep for the next day after the service. We generally get in the vault. So the thing with the vault, the idea behind the vault was always to be like a neighborhood joint and not to be kind of too into kind of homemade ingredients and more about curation, but with the training and the impetus on the quality.
Mm-hmm.
So the vault, we get in about an hour and a half, 2 hours before to do the prep. The proofing room, we'll get in probably about noon, do an afternoon of prep and have a full day.
Right.
Especially when we had the soil as well, because we worked with a test kitchen in the lab as well. So we would have to go and do we would distill ourselves.
Yeah. So when you say test kitchen stroke lab, is that something you have in a lot of bars, or is it quite unique to Milroy's then?
Well, so we actually worked from a place called The Crucible.
Right.
So The Crucible was made by, it was kind of a concept by Stu Bale, who was Tony Consigliore's right-hand man, who owns 69 Colebrook Row and is kind of the pioneer of like the Rotavac as a cocktail technique. So Stu essentially opened up a kitchen for rent that had a centrifuge in it. It had a Rotavac, so we pay a membership and then have access to it each day, so we could go and do our prep there.
Mm.
I mean, the thing is, like, so for a small bar, I mean, a small bar like ours, I can't justify the cost of that equipment.
Yeah. And with that then, so obviously you're looking at that and you're obviously going into somewhere. Is when you go into somewhere like that, is it just you there, or will there be others there? Do you get to chat about making cocktails? And
it depends. Like Crucible was great. You go there and sometimes you'd have the place to yourself, or you'd go there and you'd be surrounded by friends and brand ambassadors and bartenders from Europe who would come over with a brand, who would like show, because Crucible was really unique as a concept. So you'd find brands kind of bringing bartenders over from Europe. They'd won a competition and they would do a day at Crucible. And it was this huge room with a central table and the equipment around the sides. And so you'd find yourself there just chatting about ideas, people passing each other their drinks and their products they're working on, and everyone sort of sharing input.
So you talk about brand ambassadors there. Do you get those shameless brand ambassadors that might work for like the English Whiskey Company or something like that, coming and putting their brands upon you, saying, you know, make it with this?
I mean, yeah.
Is it your choice?
From the English Whiskey Company that I've had to tell off, but I've told off a few brand ambassadors.
Yeah.
Someone who shows up at 5:45 on a Friday night when you're trying to. Yeah.
No, I mean, you know, obviously, joking aside, though, you know, is it down to you what product you're going to make, or is it sort of a given what you're probably going to put in?
Oh, so I mean, like down to the brand? Oh, is it? So am I told what to use?
Yeah. Or
No.
Is it your personal preference to what to put into that?
Yeah, it generally is. Like
you see, obviously, where this goes is the question I asked before, that if you've got 3 or 4 people making cocktails and you've all got a preference as to which whiskey or rum or whatever you might want to put in there, or Is it a standard for the bar?
Well, generally, so certainly with each recipe, we'll have a product that will be with that recipe.
Yeah.
How we decide on that generally is by consensus, because I'm not a despot.
Yeah.
But the final call lies with me.
Yeah.
And I love the industry as a whole. I love spirits and wines and liqueurs. I love that we get our hands on things that have been made the same way for hundreds and hundreds of years, and we're still getting it. You can go and buy it in Amethyst, and it's like Mastiha is. I'm a huge fan of Mastiha, and it's only made on the south side of one island in Greece. It's the only place that tree will produce that flavor.
Yeah,
I love it, and so for me, I'm really fortunate that I get to surround myself with all of these things, and they're things that I seek out. So for me, it's choosing the products is very much about curation, rather than trying to shoehorn anything in.
Yeah, I'm being told off here because I'm being quite greedy. We do have another ambassador that's generally in here, and he likes to tell us he works for some Swedish whiskey company called McMyra, and apparently they're quite good in cocktails as well.
McMyra is delicious. We've actually we've collaborated with McMyra before. We've released 3 casks with McMyra.
Yeah, I'm going to say he's normally in here, and I'm sure he would have mentioned the brand, so we'd better get. I'm just trying to think if we've got any more. So obviously we've got Boutique generally, but no, I mean that's very interesting. That if you go to another bar, I mean, do you ever get people that come in and say, well, that's not quite the way, or it tasted in the last bar, or
and then you have to gently remind them that they're more than welcome to go and visit that other bar.
Very politely.
I think you can't account for personal preference in your guests, right? You're never going to win that battle. If somebody wants it made a certain way, all you can do is accommodate. If you make them a drink and they're like, look, like it's not the way I want it, then the only thing you can do is remake it for them.
Yeah.
But I feel like sometimes it can also be the other way. Some guests seem to think that because it was so many bars have like house product, like cocktails that they've invented themselves. And then they'll come into your bar and be like, I just had this thing over, can you make it for me? Like, no, I can't. It's theirs. It's their recipe.
I mean, that's interesting when you say you'll make it again if it's not quite right, what they expected. I mean, to me, if you go into a top restaurant and you say, oh, that doesn't taste like the last time I had it, you'd probably get the chef turning around and saying, we'll go back there then.
But sadly, the bar industry is in its infancy and we can't quite justify the egos yet.
Yeah.
But I think as an industry, we need to. The bar industry in the UK certainly needs to work on how it's represented.
Yeah,
massively.
Yeah. Is Adrian still here, or is he actually gone? Because Adrian's got a question. Go on, Adrian, you're still here, so off you go. Or are you being shy?
I've got 2 questions actually. Yep. One is I like Negronis. And what I tend to do is I tend to buy 3 bottles, gin, Campari and mix them all together and put them back in bottles. Is that the best way, or should I actually make them individually?
Add a bit of water and then you just drink them out of the bottle.
Lovely. Second one, any recommendations for a cocktail with Fernet Branca?
Cocktails with Fernet Branca. You should try the Toronto, which is essentially a rye old-fashioned. But in place of the bitters is Fernet Branca. So a teaspoon of Fernet Branca. Fernet Branca is also very good with ginger. So ginger ale or ginger beer. Like a little bit of Fernet Branca, some whiskey and some ginger. Laughing in the highball. Super fresh. I adore Fernet Branca. One of my favourite things in the whole world.
Lovely.
I've got a question on bitters, if you don't mind.
Well, actually, sorry. Very quickly.
I was looking at some...
Hang on, Paul. Just hang on, Paul. Go on.
Sorry, Paul. I will also add the Hanky Panky. Which is an old classic drink invented by Ada Coleman, who was the first head bartender at the Savoy American Bar in the late 1800s, and also the only woman to have held the position of head bartender. So go Ada Coleman. She doesn't get enough props, but she's invented some of the best drinks in the world, and the Hanky Panky is one of them with Fernet Branca.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I mean, interesting. Sorry to jump in, Paul. We'll bring you straight in. When you say that, then with her, do you find that it's an equal split between male and females cocktail making, or is it very male dominated?
It's super male dominated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting there. Like the industry is really pushing and really trying to make a difference. But I think, you know, like there's just a lot of male egos and a lot of like toxic masculinity, I think, in both kitchens and bars and in hospitality industry as a whole. A lot of people throw their weight around, and sadly it's to the detriment of the industry, and has also ended up punishing women who have wanted to join the industry.
Right.
We need to do far more to fix that.
Yeah, yeah. I think this is something that's obviously going across a lot of industries at the moment, and you know that the whiskey industry is certainly going through, you know, chatting about women in and different diversities and ethnicities and things like that. So you know, it's interesting that to hear what I mean, and I know this statement might be very politically wrong, but a lot of people would consider cocktails to be a female drink. And, you know, where females aren't making it then, or as much as they should be.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think the thing is, you know, like certainly in sort of, I've seen over my career of working at like cocktail bars and some of the best bars in the city and in the world, that it's just like, it's exactly how you, like the way that I was trained was like very Gordon Ramsay. Do you know what I mean? Like getting hit in the face by the guy that was training. Like just and it's just like, it's horrible, man. You don't need to be like that in the industry. Yes, chef, no chef. Like that's how people speak behind the bar, calling each other chef.
Right.
And you know, and in some bars, and it's kind of, it just perpetuates this really masculine environment that it's just not it doesn't produce anything good.
No, definitely not. But right, go on, Paul. Let you come in now.
Okay, Fab. So I looked up a few recipes before this, and a lot of them had their own specific bitters that they used. I've got a couple of bottles, but is there is Angostura just the generic one that you can use for everything, or is there something else that you can replace specific bitters with?
I'm really glad that you brought that up. Great question. Because it's something I wanted to talk about. Angostura is the OG, right? It's been around for hundreds of years. It's what goes in all the drinks from the 1800s up to the 1930s. And bitters, kind of craft bitters, started happening around the 90s and the noughties. No bitter, if you got a recipe that calls for Angostura, nothing is going to be a quality substitute for Angostura in that drink. It's the one. It's the only one. If you've got Angostura and Peychaud's, you shouldn't need anything else. The only other bitters that I will use are kind of more like peach bitters or aromatic bitters like that. They're more kind of leaning towards one flavor, because then you can use them as an ingredient rather than like, you can put a drop of peach bitters to make something taste peachy rather than acting as a bittering agent. So aside from that, you should only ever really need Angostura and Peychaud's.
Okay.
I mean, one thing I will come up on there, and it's a little bit different, and the question always comes up with every kind of distillery that we've got. So I'm going to slightly go left field with this. What I'd like to do is actually invite you back on maybe in a few weeks or a month or two. Can you come up with a cocktail for the Whiskey Circus?
Yeah,
we normally ask for a cask and things like that. You know, we're all, I'm just thinking maybe we could actually have a cocktail that
I could come and actually taste it, because I'm probably the closest person to Chris.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I was going to say Jamie's around there as well, isn't he? So, but
I'd love to do that for you. I'm at the bar. I'm at the bar every week. So yeah.
I mean, you know, obviously one that's very easy to make would be the easiest, and just sort of maybe a whiskey chucked in there with something very simple that we could. But you know, I think that would be great. That, you know, if we all sit down on an evening and say, yeah, we're having a whiskey circus or something like that. But
I would love to do that. I'd adore doing that. Thank you.
Anyone got any more questions then?
Sophie's got questions.
Yeah, go on, Sophie.
I've got two. So the first is about mezcal, and I was just wondering how easy mezcal is to work with cocktails wise, because I love it, but I find it quite difficult. Like I don't know how I'd mix it with anything at all, so I just drink it on its own.
I love mezcal and I love working with mezcal. Mezcal is really like, I mean, obviously it depends on the mezcal, depends on the agave that's gone into the mezcal. They do have kind of, there's a broad spectrum of flavors, but generally speaking, mezcal works really, really well with apricot. I also works, I mean, I feel like I've mentioned sherry 100 times already, but it does work really well with sherry. I have a recipe for a smoky Paloma, which is, which if you want the recipe, I'll give it to you now. It's 30 ml of grapefruit juice, 30 mils of mezcal, 30 mils of fino, 15 mils of agave, 10 of lime, shake it, top it up with soda. That's quite a big drink, but you can reduce it down for your glassware.
Sounds awesome.
And that recipe is by Nico De Soto, who owns Mace in New York. That's phenomenal. And also have a look at a drink called Naked and Famous as well, which is a gorgeous mezcal drink. Again, grapefruit and fruit, all these fruit and Aperol, you know, that's where you want it to be. It's such a big, robust flavor that you can just throw like fruit flavors and sweet things at it, and it just works really well.
Nice, cool, thank you. And my other question was about your Rotavac.
Yes.
I'm gonna do a plug now. Sorry, guys. So I work for Cooper King Distillery. I'm their assistant distiller up in York. So I work on Rotavacs, and I also distill whiskey as well. But I was just wondering how long it took you to, or why you got interested in your Rotavacs, because I had to nip off for a small amount of time, but I heard that you were distilling soil.
Yes, that's right.
Like that, and I think that's absolutely incredible. But I just wondered, like, how you decided to get into it, how long it took you to kind of learn how to work with it and things like that as well.
So low key, the Rotavac has been around in the cocktail industry for about 10 years. It's obvious, it's prohibitively expensive. Right, so getting like we use a 4-liter Buki. So I mean the cost of that is just outrageous. It's a deposit for a house. So it's only really been accessible to a few people, but as generations of bartenders have kind of passed through this training, the knowledge has become more and more disseminated. People keeping blogs, or and in bars, for a certain type of bartender or a certain type of bar, the Rotavac is a way of achieving like a kind of a purity, of a product. If you want strawberry, right, you can just put strawberries in the Rotavac, and you make your strawberry flavor to spec. You don't have to piss about with store-bought or whatever. You can make seasonal products that are to exactly your requirements.
Sorry, just jumping in there, Sophie. What was the plug? Where do you work and what do you do?
Cooper King Distillery. I'm
And
surprised I'm not wearing my
located?
t-shirt. We're up in York.
York.
We're just like 5 miles out of York.
Oh yeah, I'll write that down.
And
Anytime you want to come see us, we'd be happy to have you.
And what do you do there, Sophie?
I'm their assistant distiller.
Assistant distiller, well done.
Amazing.
Thanks.
Dream job.
Literal, yeah.
I mean,
all the time.
yeah, all right, that's enough, Sophie. But I mean, one thing that you mentioned there, you obviously like to say you like to use sherries and things like that. Any particular sherries?
Fino. I drink a lot of Fino, a lot of Manzanilla. I like this, like the salty, dry sherries. On the sweeter side, I mean, Oloroso is absolutely gorgeous. I love Oloroso and Palo Cortados as well. I love Palo Cortados. What attracts me to the spirits industry and liqueurs and wines anyway is more the kind of esoteric and ethereal side of things. And Palo Cortado just really fits that bill. The idea that they can't put it in the Solera because the wine has suddenly taken a turn. So they just have to let it mature separately. It's just, I love that.
I mean, the reason I ask, you know, surprisingly, at the English Whiskey Company, we do a PX liqueur.
Oh, you
And
do,
obviously-
I've actually got a bottle of that, and it's phenomenal.
Exactly, yeah. You know, I mean, I don't want to take up any promotional things on this, but no, I mean, that's brilliant. You know, it's interesting that you can get so many different diverse types of spirit into cocktails. You know, and that's one thing that I suppose for somebody like me who really doesn't understand the cocktail culture as well as I should do, maybe, that, you know, it's not just made with a cheap bourbon or a cheap whiskey or a cheap blend or a cheap whatever. It's made with lots of high-end whiskies as well.
I mean, I think that's it. And this is what I was sort of saying about like how the industry needs to represent itself. Firstly, like we act as stewards for our bar and for the brands that we work with, especially when we're picking who we want to work with. It'd be a discredit to them if we were shit bartenders and shit hosts. And I think what you're saying is kind of exactly the issue with the industry at the moment, is that I work really hard to make sure that my staff are trained, that my bookshelves are full of books on sherry, on whiskey, on rums, on tiki culture of the 50s. I'm reading a book on the history of soda water at the moment. Like sadly, that's my life. But the more that we agree to spend our money in places where we get treated like shit, the more we perpetuate this idea, and where the drinks are crap, and people perpetuate this idea that a bartender requires no training, then the industry won't make any strides.
I think that's the difference, though, from certainly sort of my generation, where you grow up in the countryside, say, rather than a city. You go to your local pub and you've got your barmaid or your barman, and they're pulling a pint. There's some sort of understanding as to what they're doing, but it's different probably working in a cultural place where it's all about the drink and the culture, rather than sitting down in your local pub having a cigarette and a pint.
I mean, that's true. I think also, sadly, in London, we do live within this bubble where we have access to all these things, and you know, and the hospitality means different things to different people based on those cultural differences. But I think, though, as well, I think there's no reason why somebody in a pub shouldn't be just as proud of knowing how their kegs work and getting the right PSI, that spot on PSI, making sure they pour the perfect drink. Like, it's the same skill set, it's just applied differently. Yeah. And I think we as consumers need to be more aware of that.
I was going to say, the other thing I find with your cocktails, Chris, and I really can't compare them to anybody else because I don't drink cocktails very often, is although they would be to some people slightly more expensive than the average, the length of time it takes to drink one of your cocktails, because it tastes so bloody good, makes it worth it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, I brought a friend into Milroy's and they weren't considering going out for cocktails or whatever, and she still raves about it a year and a half later because she hasn't had anything better, and everything else now disappoints her when it comes to cocktails. So you've probably killed off her local establishments, but
yeah, she's not alone. I've heard that. Even when I've taken on staff, after about a month of training, they were just like, "Well, I can't drink in a bar now. That's it."
Yeah, exactly.
And that's interesting. That, you know, where you just said that the training after a month. What sort of length of time do you normally give training for then? Or again, does it differ between the people?
It's yeah, exactly. It's constant. It's just like it's built. You got to build the building blocks, right?
Yeah.
Everything is kind of, you got to build the context. That it's like learning to read a label. Do you know what I mean? Like when we're all into whiskey, we all know whiskey. When we look at the label of the whiskey, of the bottle of whiskey, it tells us information about what to expect from the liquid that's in there. So the best thing to do is just build the building blocks that apply to spirits as a whole. How distillation works, how equilibrium in the environments where it's aged works, the impacts that has on a product. So the next time that they look at a bottle of spirit or a bottle of liqueur, then they can apply that methodology to it. Once they've got that bug for like loving what's around them, then you're just training is constant, just more discovery, more learning, more discovery, more learning.
Yeah. And do you, do you find when your staff are coming to you constantly saying, I've come up with this, or I've come up with this, I've come up with this, does that give you a sort of pride then, as knowing that you've maybe trained that person and they've got that enthusiasm to do that? Or, you know,
Depends how good it is.
Pardon?
It depends how good it is.
No, but I mean, obviously the fact that they're wanting to do this experimenting and things like that, rather than just somebody turning up to work, yes, they may be good at the job, but the passion isn't there to go and push that boundaries even further.
Well, that's it. You know, I think the passion is really important. I think this anyone who wants to make a career out of hospitality better enjoy it. Do you know? Because I mean, it's tough.
Yeah.
So the passion is key. Yeah, it's brilliant to see, and I really encourage discovery. To be fair, I let the guys drink behind the bar because we're all adults. If any of them ever got drunk or ever, like, they'd be out on their asses. But generally, I think the more they can, what's the point of like having all this great stuff around you if you're not going to be allowed to play with it and
you
taste
also
it
need to know your products at the end of the
Yeah.
day. If you're it's all well and good following a recipe, but if you don't know how it's supposed to taste, or if you could make it slightly better or slightly different, then what's the point?
Never trust a skinny chef.
Exactly.
I mean, that's an interesting thing in a sense then. So if every now and again you're obviously only having the odd little sip of the drink through the working night, that, you know, somebody might come up to you and say this cocktail doesn't quite taste right. Well, if you're not tasting things on a night, then you may have an ingredient that's just not quite right that day.
Exactly. Think of it like a corked wine. If you're not familiar with the wine, and your guest tells you that it's corked, it's just their word against yours.
Yeah.
You need, that's what a sommelier's job is, to understand these things. And why should we as stewards to spirits be any different?
No, that's quite interesting. So anybody got any more questions before we start to wrap up?
Nope.
No. Andy, yeah, go on.
That's all right. Sorry, just let me shift this cap. So I'm sorry if this has already been asked. I've had to sort of pop away a few times. I know that there's a lot of skill and complexity required around a lot of modern cocktails and a lot of modern cocktail culture. And, you know, there's obviously a lot of cocktails out there that require things like, you know, like smoking certain things, making your own syrups, using like rainbow dust and unicorn tears and whatever else. But for you, as someone that does it day in, day out, what classics do you come back to all the time? Like, what is your go-to?
My go-to is a martini, either Gibson with a pickle in it, so pickled onion.
Oh, nice.
Overproof gin and white vermouth, not dry, wet, like a wet martini, but with a white vermouth. It's crisp, it's clear, it's satisfying, it's delicious. That, and then I like daiquiris. I love citrus. I love like citrus-led drinks as well.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, my go-to if I'm popping into a bar for one drink, I have a quick martini.
Nice. I've got to say as well, going back to what you told me about before, it's all Pal's lovely.
Oh, it's banging, isn't it? It's such a good.
Making a couple more of them.
Right, what I'm going to do now, Chris, I'm going to wrap the recording session up, but please feel free to stay behind and have a chat with us. And really want to say thank you for coming on, giving us all, you know, a few insights into the cocktail world. Obviously, Milroy's should be very proud to have you there. Hopefully, knowing Simo, he will, because I know he really looks after his staff there as well. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it's been a brilliant session, and thank you. Yeah, cheers.
Yeah, I'd love to stay on and I'm going to have a drink.
Yeah. Good idea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys.